we'll go ahead and get started here. Introduce myself. In case you don't know me, my name is Skip Orth. I'm the owner of Father and Son Pest and Lawn Solutions. My son Buddy is right over there. He and I are the team along with the rest of our crew here, and we're very glad that you took your Saturday out to be here with us. We appreciate you being here and thank you for coming. I hope that when you leave here that you'll have some good knowledge that you can use to keep your lawns healthy, keep your irrigation system maintained. We are recording this session and we will eventually turn it into a DVD. So later on, if you want this material, it will be available to you. Just a couple things I'd like to go over before we get started. The way that we're going to, the format that we're going to have is that I'll talk for 30 or 40 minutes, take questions, and then we'll take a little break, come back together, talk for 30 or 40 minutes, take questions, take a break, and we'll do that until around between 12 and 1 o'clock this afternoon. After we're done, if you have any other questions or want to talk to me about anything or ask anything, I'll be hanging around to answer your questions. I do have some material available here for you. I have the book that I've written. It's what every homeowner on the Emerald Coast needs to know about lawn care. And then I also have the DVD of the presentation that I did last spring, which was basically a spring lawn seminar telling you about what you needed to do to your lawn and treatment and fertilizer and things like that. Both of these are available. I'm not charging anything for them. However, what I am requesting is a donation to my favorite charity, which is Refuge for Women. I'll take just a couple minutes and tell you about Refuge for Women. I'm on the board of directors for the Florida chapter of Refuge for Women. Refuge for Women is a national organization, and what they do is they have facilities around the country that help women who have been victims of sex trafficking recover their lives and get out of prostitution and lead productive, normal lives thereafter. It's a 2-year program that these women go through. They receive substance abuse counseling, job counseling, all the services and help that they need to get out of what they're in and lead productive lives. It's an excellent organization. They have a 94% success rate. They've been doing this since 2009. Well over 100 women have gone through the program, and like I say, out of those women that have done it, they've had a 94% success rate of women that have not returned to substance abuse or return to prostitution. So at the current time, there's 6 facilities around the country that do this. We're in the process of opening one here in Florida in Miami. We have the house secured. Right now we're just trying to raise enough money to staff the house because it's, they have a 24-hour, they staff the house with 24-hour counselors and people that are there for the residents. So our goal is $50,000. We're hoping to raise that by the end of this fall so we can actually start bringing residents into the home and start helping them. Refuge for Women gets an application for someone wanting to come into the program, one application every 3 days. So there's a huge need out there for these services, and there's not a whole lot of, at this time, there's not, the need is far greater than what the supply is. However, we're trying to change that. So feel free to pick up any of my material over there. Again, no charge, but I would greatly appreciate it. I'll leave the amount up to you if you would just make a donation to Refuge for Women. Also, we have bumper stickers here. They're magnetic. It's I trust my lawn to Father and Son. And if you have one of these on your car, and we see your car outside of your driveway, somewhere outside your neighborhood, then we'll give you $100. So feel free to pick up those bumper stickers and put them on your car, and all of us will be on the lookout for you. And I would love to give away $100. By the way, it's one per month. Sorry, I do limit it to one per month. But if you get one month, you're eligible the next month. So feel free to do that. Also, there's a sign-up sheet on the table over there if you would like a lawn consultation. We provide free lawn consultations. If there's a problem that you're having with your lawn, it's dying, you resodded it and 2 or 3 times and you're having problems with it again, whatever. Give us your name and phone number. We'll contact you, set up an appointment, and come out, take a look at your lawn, let you know what needs to be done, what you can do to get it back. And then, of course, the service that we provide, what our company does is we do monthly lawn treatments. We do fertilizing, insect control, weed, and disease treatments for lawns to keep them healthy and things like that. Now, the one thing we don't do irrigation work for the most part. We do a little bit of maintenance, but we don't do irrigation work. And I wanted to clarify that just so you know that if what I'm showing you here today, if you don't want to do it yourself, I can refer you to somebody. But the reason I'm holding this workshop today is because irrigation is such a foundational part of keeping a healthy lawn. And I want you to have the knowledge and the understanding of what you can do to keep your irrigation system functioning, keep it maintained, and maybe do a little troubleshooting yourself, because it's not that complicated. But a lot of times, you look at this is all you see of your irrigation system when you look in the ground, and you look at that and it's just like a black box. I don't know what's underneath that little round circle there, and a lot of times you may be afraid to do anything to it for fear of that you'll mess something up. So I want to kind of remove the mystery and show you kind of what's underneath the ground, and so you won't be afraid to go out there and if you need to replace a sprinkler head, you can just dig around it and take it out, replace it, or if you need to clean, take it apart and clean it. It's not that hard. So I hope to be able to explain all that to you this morning and give you some tools or some knowledge that you can use to maintain your irrigation system to keep your lawn healthy overall. Did I miss anything? Do we have anything over there? I think I covered everything. Okay. All right. Well, very good. Okay. Well, what I'd like to do is just start with talking about the components of an irrigation system. They're all basically the same, even though the brand name may be different. They all work about the same way. There may be little nuances as far as exactly how the controllers work and things like that, but they're all basically the same. The two different types of systems that you'll find in this area, or just anywhere really, is an analog system and a digital system. I'll start with the analog system. The way the analog system works is it has a timer. This timer basically is just a really fancy on and off switch. That's all it is. It just turns the pump, the irrigation pump, on and off at preset times that you tell it to come on and off. There's 2 dials on this timer. There's a small dial, and on this small dial there's 14 pins. Each pin represents 1 day of the week, so that you have 2 weeks worth of pins on this small dial. On this particular timer, it's a K-Rain timer. On this particular timer, when on the small dial, when the pin is pulled out, the timer will skip that day of the week, so the pump will not run. if the pin is pushed in, it will water on that day of the week. So if I went through and I pulled out every other pin and had every other pin pushed in, it would water every other day of the week. Now, the only exception to that is some of you may have a timer like this that's metal. It's yellow, it has a yellow dial, and it has metal pins instead of plastic. Those timers work the opposite. On the day wheel, if the pin is pulled out, it will water that day. If it is pushed in, it will skip that day. So with the timers that have the yellow metal dials, they're opposite as far as on and off for the days. On the larger dial, this is the time that you want to, that you set the time where what time you want the system to come on. And the way you do that, there are plastic pins that you insert into the dial over the time on the dial that you want it to come on. Each pin represents 15 minutes of run time. So if you have 3 pins in a row, it'll run for 45, it'll turn the pump on, and the pump will run for 45 minutes. And as you can see here, and you can, if you want to come up later, you can look at it closely. These pins are put in the dial in sets of 3. There's 3, and then we skip 1, and there's 3, and we skip 1, and there's 3, and then we skip 1. The reason we set it up like that is we want the pump to turn off and then turn back on so that it will switch zones. This is an index valve. This black round cylinder is called an index valve. And this particular index valve has 4 pipes coming out of it, so it's 4 zones. So every time, and on the top of this, there's a hydraulic cam that is activated by water pressure. So when the pump comes on, one of these zones comes on. When the pump turns off, when the water pressure is relieved, it switches to the next zone. So every time the pump goes off, comes back on, goes off, comes back on, it switches around to another zone. The other day I went to a house, and these people, like so many of us in this room, moved here from up north somewhere, and there are no irrigation systems up there. So many times you move, when people moved into this area, this is the first time they've ever had an irrigation system, and it's kind of a mystery on how it runs. So I went to this house the other day, and they were having problems with their lawn, and why isn't it doing well? And I got to looking at it, and it looked very drought stressed. And they said their pump had been running every day, that it ran for like 2 hours every day. So I looked at the timer, and sure enough, the pump was running for 2 hours, but there was no gaps between the pins. It was running for 2 hours straight, which means the system wasn't shutting off and turning back on, which means it wasn't changing zones. And they happen to have not 4 zones, but 6 zones. So what that meant was they were watering each zone of their lawn for 2 hours once every 6 days, because it would take 6 rotations of the pump coming off and on to get around to each zone. So that was a fairly easy fix. All we had to do was break the pins apart a little bit, put gaps in between the pins so that the system would rotate around every day instead of coming on for 2 hours and just watering one zone for 2 hours every 6 days. Now, this particular timer is equipped with a rain gauge or a rain sensor. What that will do, if your timer is equipped with that, it'll have a little sensor. A lot of times they're attached to the gutter, and if it rains like it did this morning, it automatically bypasses the timer if it's supposed to come on that day. So that will keep the timer from coming on. I'm sure that you have seen, as well as I have, driving around on a rainy day with people's sprinklers going, and it's pouring down rain. So that will keep that from happening. It is actually written into Florida law that if you have an irrigation system, you must have a rain sensor on your irrigation system. It is illegal to have an irrigation system without a rain sensor. Now, I can tell you, in the 25 years that I've been doing this, I've never seen anybody arrested for not having a rain sensor. Okay, so I don't really think there's a whole lot of enforcement to that law, but you can, just FYI, it's illegal to have an irrigation system without a rain sensor on it. Let me ask, are there any questions about the analog system before we go on? Yes, sir.
Okay, so if you have 4 zones and you want it to fire, how many pins would that take to fire each zone for, say, 1 hour or 2 hours?
Okay, so the question is, if you have an analog system like this, and you want the system to fire all 4 zones for, so let's say 30 minutes per zone. What you would do is you would take 2 pins and put them together, and you can come up and look at this at the break. This is how this is set up. Each pin on the big dial represents 15 minutes of run time. So you would put 2 pins together and then a gap so the pump would shut off. And then 2 pins and a gap so the pump will shut off and then come back on, and then 2 pins and a gap. And you would do that. You would create 4 sets. If you wanted it to water every day like that, then you would push in all of the pins on the day dial, and it would water every day, 30 minutes per zone, every zone. Now, what happens sometimes are these pins get lost or they get broken. So there's a couple different ways that you can kind of play around with this and make it do what you want it to do in different ways. Let's say, for instance, you only had 4 pins, but you had 4 zones, but you wanted to water the zones for 30 minutes. So what you would do is you could water each zone 30 minutes every other day if you had 2 sets of pins and then pushed in every pin in the day dial, so that the system would come on every day, but it would only run 2 zones every day. So you would run 2 zones one day, 2 zones the next day. There's different ways you can set this up, but that's basically how you do it.
Does somebody sell pens if you're out?
Usually you can get them from an irrigation supply store like Ewing Irrigation or Site One. They usually have the pins, extra pins. I've actually looked for them online and I can't find them, like from Amazon or eBay. You would think that there would be people that would sell just bags of pins, but Navarre Lumber has pins? Okay, well that's good to know. Yes, sir.
What's the best time to water?
That's a very good question. The question is, what is the best time to water during the day? The best time to water your lawn is while the dew is still on the grass. So typically I say between midnight and 8 a.m. is the best time to put water on your grass. The reason for that is that if you put the water on the lawn while the dew is still on the grass, you're not extending the number of hours during the day that the grass is wet, which can create disease activity in the lawn. If the grass is constantly wet, you have a higher chance of disease activity in your lawn than if you let it dry out during the day. Okay, yes, sir.
Touching on the rain sensors, it would probably also affect the digital systems. For example, yesterday we have a 1-inch rain, nice 1-inch rain, and your system's set up to run all zones the next day, starting at, say, 6 a.m. What time period does a rain sensor cover, 24 hours? Or?
Yeah, so the question is, how long will the rain sensor detect rain? I mean, if we get a rain today, how long will the sensor hold off the next watering cycle? And I don't know that I can give you a specific answer on that. The way most of them work, they have little discs that absorb water and they expand and they interrupt the electrical circuit when these little discs expand, and then they dry out and they contract and the electrical circuit is restored. Just from my experience, I think they would hold it off at least 24 hours. It would take that long for the electrical circuit to be restored, but I don't know exactly. Okay. All right. Just a couple other things about the analog system. One, there's the advantages and disadvantages to this system. Number one, the advantages is that it's pretty bulletproof. I mean, there's not a whole lot that can go wrong with this system. I mean, there's the timers eventually wear out after several years. The pins sometimes can break off, get like dry rotted and break off. But really, for the most part, these are pretty stable systems. There's not a whole lot that can go wrong with them. The disadvantage of these systems is that they're not very flexible as far as giving you the option of watering different parts of your yard at different days. In other words, the system is either off or on. Either it will water all zones or no zones, pretty much. If you want to water specific zones, you have to come out and manually turn the pump on and turn the pump on and off until it works its way around to the zone you want to water and then leave it on. So if you want to water a specific zone on a specific day, you have to go out and manually do that. Okay, so it doesn't give you a lot of flexibility as far as how you water. But it is a pretty, it's pretty simple, basic, bulletproof system.
Metal pins the same as the plastic pins?
As far as the question are the metal pins the same as the plastic pins as far as the run time? Yes, the metal pins are the same. They might be a minute or two off, but yes, they're basically the same. Now, one kind of anomaly about the metal timers is one thing the metal timer has that these don't, if you have a metal timer, is that in addition to these pins that give the run time, it also has a larger pin in it that will come around and actually manually turn this day dial. So it'll trip the day dial. It'll have just one big pin in it. And again, I was talking with a customer one day, and she's like, my sprinkler just isn't coming on. It just doesn't come on. And she had a metal timer, and I went out and manually turned it on, and the pump was working fine. The system was working, and I got to looking at it, and what it was she was missing the large day. It's called the day pin that comes around and actually turns the day dial, so that the hourly dial was spinning, but it wasn't turning the day dial, and so the day dial wasn't actually activating the system. So if you have one of those metal timers, you need to just double check and make sure you have the large day pin in there as well as the hour pins. Yes, ma'am.
When you manually turn your pump off and on to go to a different zone, when you turn it off, how long do you wait to let your controller know?
That's a good question. The question is, if you want to manually go through your irrigation system and go through the zones, how long do you let the pump, when you turn it on and then you turn it back off, how long do you have to wait until you turn it back on for it to switch. It really varies with the system, because what has to happen is this component needs to depressurize for the cam in here to turn. Some systems you can almost do it immediately. I mean, you turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it back on, and they'll switch. Other systems you have to wait a little bit. Now, this happens to be a plastic index valve. There are larger metal index valves, and the metal ones have a tendency to hang up, and they have a tendency to get stuck sometimes. And if you're turning it and trying to change zones manually, and it's not changing, sometimes, you know, just slapping it on the side to get it to get that little disc to change and seat is necessary. But usually, you know, on average, it's anywhere from about 15 to 30 seconds is enough time for that pressure to release and go to the next zone. Doesn't happen very often, but I've ran into it a few times. Sometimes these will skip zones. In other words, you'll have it set to come on and water every day or every other day, and you'll notice that maybe instead of going, you know, all the way through, it'll, you know, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, it'll go 1, 3, and 4. It'll skip 2, or it'll skip one of the zones. One of the main reasons, one of the main causes of it skipping zones is if your pump is having a hard time pulling the water. Maybe the well is getting a little iffy, or maybe there's an air leak in the plumbing of the pump in the well, and the pump is surging, and it'll pull up the water, and then the water will fall back down, and then it'll pull it up again, and it'll surge. And if the pump surges, it can cause this to skip zones, because it'll pressurize and then it'll let go and then it'll pressurize again, all in a matter of seconds. And when it does that, it can cause this to switch zones before it ever has a chance to run that zone. So if you have a system like this that's skipping zones, that very well may be one of the reasons why it's doing that. Okay, let me go on and talk about the digital system here. The way the digital system works is, instead of having an index valve, it has actually valves that are opened and closed by electrically. And these the wires to these valves run back to the timer, and that when the timer comes on, it will actually activate a relay switch which will turn the pump on, and at the same time it will open a designated valve. So the timer's actually going to the solenoid switch and the valve and turning them both on at the same time. Now, the thing that you can do with this, with the digital system, that you can't do with the analog system, is you can set it up to run just about any way that you want it to run. You can run zones 1 and 2 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can run zones 3 and 4 on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday if you want to. You can set it up to run whatever zone you want just about any time or any day that you want to run it. Now, where you would want to do that is, maybe your front yard is really sunny and your backyard is really shady. So your front yard needs a lot more water than your backyard, so you would set the front yard to run every day and the backyard to run every other day. Or let's say that you have, one zone is just your planting beds, and then the other zone is all the grass. So you can set the zone with the planting beds to run every other day or every 3 days, because established shrubs don't need as much water as grass does. So you can eliminate some of your maintenance and some of your pruning by not giving the shrubs as much water as the grass. So you can water the shrubs 2 or 3 times a week and water the grass every day. You have a lot more options, with this system than you do this system. However, that's the advantage. The disadvantage is these systems are, their Achilles heel is electrical surges. And we have a lot of lightning around here. And although they've improved over the years as far as the, how resistant they are to those surges, they still are susceptible. If you have a lightning strike close to your house, it can knock out the timer, and you'll just have to replace the timer. I mean, that is the kind of the weak point.
What if
Yes.
the timer is indoors?
Yeah, the question is, what if your timer is indoors? Would it be as affected? I don't think so, but it would really depend on the electricity. And I mean, personally, my house has gotten hit like 4 times with lightning. And if depending on the hit and where it comes from, it could knock that out. But I would say, generally speaking, indoors would be safer than outdoors for the timer.
Cost differential.
The question is the cost differentiation. If you're installing a new system, there's not a whole lot of cost difference between the two. Now, you can convert this system to that system. That can be a little expensive. It's not outrageous, but what you do is you replace this with this and that component, and then you replace this with these valves. So just depending on how many zones you have, it would depend on what the cost would be, but I would estimate an irrigation person would charge somewhere probably between $500 and $1,000 to convert a system like that to a system like this. So a couple things about this system. A couple things that I see, the mistakes that I see most people make with this system is, with this system, you can set multiple start times. So if you want your irrigation system to run 2 or 3 times a day, which, by the way, the only time you should do that is if you have brand new sod. You shouldn't water more than once a day any other time other than if you have brand new sod. But you can set this. This does have the capacity to have multiple start times so that you can set it to come on at 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m., and 2 a.m. if you want to. Now, the mistake that I've seen a lot of people make is they think that each zone has to have its own start time. So if you have a 4-zone system, they'll set the system to come on an hour, starting at say 4 a.m. and then 5 a.m. and 6, 7, and thinking that it's turning on a different zone each time. That's not the case. Every start time starts from zone 1 and it'll go all the way through the system. So a lot of times I'll get someone who says, yeah, whenever anybody calls me and says my system just won't shut off. It starts at 4 in the morning and doesn't shut off until 2 in the afternoon. Well, usually when I hear that, I know it's what they have is they've somehow got multiple start times programmed into that, and what the system is just going all the way through and then it's restarting again and going all the way through with multiple start times. So if you have this system and it doesn't seem like it's shutting off and it just keeps going through the cycles, check the start times that you have programmed in there. The other thing that you can do with this system is it has different programs that you can run. Okay, so these programs will run simultaneously, so that, remember how I said you can set, if you wanted to water your backyard 3 times a week and wanted to water your front yard every day, you would set program A to run 3 times a week, and you would set just that one zone on your backyard, and you would put, the only zone you would put any time on would be that one zone in your backyard and set it to run 3 times a week. The other zones you would just put 0 time on, and it would run 3 days a week. And then you go to program B, and the zone that was watering your front yard, you'd set it to come on every day, but just the zone that was designated to your front yard, put time on it. So that's one of the things that you can do with this system, is that you can run multiple different programs. But those programs, it's just important to know that those programs will run simultaneously. So if you have the same zone running at the same time on the same program, they'll just overlap. The programs on that will overlap. What is the average, or I'd probably rephrase it and say ideal time that you want to run each zone for different types of grass? I would say that the rule of thumb is to put down more water less often than less water more often. So it's better to run the system for 30 or 45 minutes or even an hour, but run it less frequently than it is to run it, say, for 15 minutes more frequently. What you will do by setting up your irrigation like that is, if you put a lot of water on the lawn at one time, that water is going to travel down past the root system, and the roots are going to follow the water. Then as that ground begins to dry out, the roots are going to be stimulated to grow deeper and hunt for more water. You're going to stimulate your root growth by watering that way. If you take the system and you put a little bit of water on the lawn every day, say 15 minutes, the water is going to stay right in the first half to 1 inch of soil, and that's where the roots are going to stay. Anything deeper than that, there isn't going to be a water available. So the roots, you will develop a shallow root system by keeping the lawn watered frequently with just a little bit of water. So I would say, to answer your question, ideally 30 to 45 minutes of water, as infrequently as you can water without drought stressing the lawn. Your irrigation system, really what it is it's a safety net for the lawn to keep it out of drought stress. With weather like we've been having, you may not even need to run your irrigation system. It's not there to prop the lawn up. It's there for times when our weather patterns go into a dry weather pattern, and we have extended amount of times where it doesn't rain. That's when the irrigation system needs to be applied, utilized to keep the grass out of drought stress. You can condition your grass, and it's really healthy for your lawn to condition your grass to need less water. There's areas in my own lawn that are not irrigated, and I have Bermuda grass in those areas that has volunteered on its own, and it's a lot of Bermuda grass, and it does fine without any irrigation at all. It's healthy. We treat it, we fertilize it, and it gets no irrigation. And I don't, in that area, I do not have a really high water table, but it just, it volunteered on its own, and it kind of acclimated itself to that environment and to the fact that it wasn't getting any water, and it just grew. There's another property that we just volunteered to maintain. It's a church over on Panhandle. There's 3 acres there, and most of it is St. Augustine and Centipede. There is no irrigation system there. However, the water table, I will say the water table is a little bit high there, but there's no irrigation system. The grass was established. We planted a lot of the grass there and got it going, but then just left it alone. And probably 80% of that 3 acres is St. Augustine and Centipede. It gets no water, but it does fine even in the middle of the summer. So it takes time to acclimate your lawn like that, and you probably would, if you tried to do that, you would have to go through some stages where the lawn didn't look too good. So you may not, and if you have an irrigation system, you may not want to do that unless you just like to experiment like I do. But The grass can be trained to survive on less water. You just have to, kind of work with it to do that. Ideal way to water is put down more water less frequently than less water more frequently. So it would be like 30 to 45 minutes every 2 or 3 days. But let me say, every lawn is different. Every lawn has different requirements. So it's something that you really need to just kind of experiment with and find out what's going to work for your lawn. But that's kind of a general rule of thumb. Yes, sir.
Would your advice be the same if your lawn is on sand?
Well, they're all on sand. They're
Beach versus...
Oh, okay. Beach. Now that's significant. So beach versus on the mainland, the beach sand is much more coarse than our sand here on the mainland. So yes, it does need more water. The beach, if you're trying to grow a lawn on the island, it's going to need more of everything. It's going to need more water, more fertilizer, more everything. So yes, you need to water it. Generally speaking, I tell people to cut their systems off around October and just not water any until March of the following year. But on the beach, that would be an exception because of the wind and just the harshness of the environment over there when it comes to growing grass. Yes, so that's a good question. Yes, sir.
Touching on this question of how long to run a system, given that even an individual system might have different types of heads and so forth within the system that put different quantities of water down, wouldn't an amount of water be the more suitable gauge? I don't know where I got it from. I try to put 3/8 of an inch of water each sprinkler session on each zone, and it varies from zone to zone how long it has to run to do that. And a simple way I came up with or heard of to do that is these cat tins or similar tuna tin.
Mm-hmm.
Get a little collection of those. Put them around your zone. See how much water goes down in an hour.
And you're absolutely right. Yes, the comment was that, really and truly the best way to determine how much irrigation you need to put out is by putting out rain gauges around and running your system and seeing how much water is collected in each one of those gauges. And tuna cans work really well. Any kind of round cylinder with the top open works well as far as measuring the amount of water that your system is putting out. And you may find that certain zones put out less water than other zones. And like the gentleman mentioned, certain heads even, and we'll talk about those here in next session, put out more water than other heads. So yes, ideally speaking, the best thing to do is just check and see how much water is going out. I would put out at least a 1/2 inch of water each irrigation event that I had. You can't, as long as you're not prolonging the time the grass is wet or doing it more frequently, you can't really put too much water at one time on. I mean, it's, where the problem, where you get into problem with overwatering is when you do it too frequently. Putting more water down at one time, whether you do it, 30 minutes or an hour, that hour, even if it's more than what it needs, is not going to hurt it, as long as you give it time until the next irrigation event is scheduled. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is dealing with sprinkler heads, broken pipes, basic maintenance, irrigation system maintenance. This is the kind of stuff that, if you have your system going, you look at your front door and you've got a geyser, coming out in the middle of the yard. What do you do? If one of your heads isn't, if one of your heads is popping up and it's not spraying, nothing's coming out of it. What do you do? How do you go about fixing that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start talking about the two basic different types of irrigation heads, how they work and what you do to what you can do to maintain them. This is it's called a Rainbird 5000. It's very common in this area. The other brands of heads like Hunter and Toro, they're all similar to this. They work on the same basic principle. There's a few minor differences as far as the way they're adjusted, but it's very similar. The way this head works is that it shoots a steady stream of water and rotates back and forth. It's called a rotor because it rotates back and forth. The way these come from the factory is they are set to rotate at 180 degrees. So they are preset from the factory to rotate at a half circle. Now you can adjust that half circle to anywhere to just a sliver to a full 360. And when it does a full 360, it'll go all the way around, stop, and then come all the way back. The way you adjust these is, and you can come up later and look at the top of this head, but at the top of this head there's an arrow, and that arrow indicates where the water comes out of. So, and you can actually take the top of this head and move it back and forth, and it'll show you the pattern that this head is set for. So right now this is a brand new head. It's set to go back and forth in a half circle or 180 degrees. So the left, this is important, the left side of the arc is fixed. You can't change it. It's fixed from the factory. The only thing that you can adjust is the right side of the arc. So if I'm putting this, say this is my house, and I'm putting the irrigation head next to my house, and I want it to shoot this way and travel around this way and then back, where it stops on the left side, I have to set it in the ground like that. And what I have to do is I have to turn the whole thing to get that left side where I want. So I get the left side, I turn it where the left side is where I want, and then I adjust the right side to go as far as I want it to go, or as short as I want it to go. And I do that with a little rainbird screwdriver. You know, it doesn't have to be a rainbird screwdriver. It can be a small screwdriver like this. And in the top of this head, there's a little slot that I can insert this screwdriver in. And it has a positive and a negative with an arrow. So if I insert the screwdriver and turn it around and wait for it to, I try and find the slot for it to seat into, and then according to the arrow, if I want to increase the arc, in other words, if I want it to go from maybe 180 degrees to 270 degrees to do like a 3/4 circle, I'll turn it to the right and it'll increase that arc, and now it goes all the way around to 270 instead of 180 like it was set at. Now if I want to turn it back, say I want it to go, instead of doing a 180, I want it to do like a 90 degree or a 1/4 pi, I'll turn that back to the other direction, and now it goes less than 180 degrees. However, the left side of the arc is still fixed. So since the left side of the arc is fixed, if you go to replace one of these, when you screw it in, don't torque it down. Don't screw it down really tight, because you'll want to have a little bit of free playroom in there to adjust that left side to where you want it, and then adjust the right with the little slot up here to how far you want the head to go. Okay? Any questions on that at this moment? Yes, sir.
Now with that arc setting, you don't know quite what you've done until you run the system, is that correct?
Well, on these heads you do, because you can actually turn them manually like I'm doing here, back and forth, and the arrow on top of the head will show you where the water's coming out, so you can actually see where that water's coming out and how far it's turning by just turning it manually like this without the system running. And it doesn't hurt the head to do that. It's fine, they're designed like that. Yeah, you can, yeah, where the right side, where it stops, you can see where it stops. And then, you know, you may have to do a little bit of fine tuning after you turn it on because, you know, water isn't like a laser beam. It kind of spreads out a little bit, so you may have to fine tune that adjustment a little bit once you turn it on and get it to set right. Okay? Now, occasionally, these heads will get clogged up with debris. We were talking earlier this morning about reclaimed water systems. Does anybody have a reclaimed system that's run on reclaimed water? Reclaimed water is water that has, it's not potable water, but it has been partially cleaned up, but it still has like a lot of algae and stuff in it, and that algae will get into these sprinkler parts and it'll clog them up. Or sometimes sand, if maybe sand is coming out of the well, different things will clog these, will have a tendency to clog these heads up. So with these rotor heads, you can remove the guts from the head by unscrewing the top and pulling out the inside. Now you can do this while it's in the ground. While it's still connected to the system, you can unscrew it and pull it out. And in the bottom here, there's a screen that can be, well, I won't do it right now, but there's a screen in the bottom here that you can actually remove and clean that will get clogged up. So if you've got pressure on the system, everything's working, but there's no water coming out of the sprinkler head, that's where you clean out the rotors at the bottom there. As far as the filter, you have to kind of pry it out. Take a screwdriver and kind of pry it out, and then snap it back in. Now, the way these are connected to the system is most irrigation heads are connected with flex pipe, or sometimes it's called funny pipe. And they have a barbed elbow on the bottom of them that just is connected like that. Okay, so if you need to replace a head is damaged, it runs over, whatever, this is what it's going to look like underground, and it's actually going to connect to another barb, which is going to connect to your main pipe like this. Here, I'll just use that one. So underground, this is what your sprinkler system looks like. It has a piece of flex pipe here. This is connected to the PVC pipe like that, which goes back to your pump. And then you have these they're called funny pipe barbs. So when you unscrew the head, this is what you're going to see in the ground, and what the irrigation head is going to screw onto. Now, if you're going to change a head, it's important that you dig out around, give yourself plenty of room around the head, because you don't want sand and debris and dirt and stuff falling in here when you remove the head, because if it does and you put the new head on, then that sand and dirt and debris is going to go right up in the head and clog it, and you're going to have to take it off again and clean it out and all that kind of stuff. When you remove the guts of the head, clean out the filter, put it out, have you changed the arc? No, you have not. The arc remains the same, but you'll just need to check it so that you'll know how to set it so that left side is still where you want it to be. Okay? Now, what will happen sometimes is you'll have one of these barbs in the ground, and maybe it gets run over with a mower, maybe for whatever reason, but it gets broken off like this, and it's hard to extract. They make a special tool called an extractor. You can get these at Ace Hardware, and they're fluted on one side, and you stick that in there, and then you can just extract that broken piece like that so that you can screw the new piece in there. Another thing that I'll mention is with this funny pipe, like if one of the advantages with this funny pipe is that if you need to do some minor modifications as far as where the head is placed, a lot of times you'll have a situation where when the landscape was first installed, the heads were placed and you had a small plant planted, and now that small plant isn't so small anymore, and it's grown over the head and it's blocking the head. A lot of times when you have the head on a piece of flex pipe like this, you can just dig up around it and actually just move the pipe or move the head out in front of the pipe. You can reposition the head to a certain degree with the funny pipe that's connected to it. Yes, sir.
Having had to work on numerous heads in my yard, I have no flex.
Okay.
It's direct to PVC. Is that quite unusual?
It's not quite unusual. Usually if it was a homeowner or something like that originally installed the system, it's installed with what we call hard pipe. It's hard piped, so that the head, instead of having flex pipe, the head is screwed directly onto the PVC pipe like this with just a little nipple, and there is no flexibility to it. Now you can put the heads on flex pipe. All you have to do is unscrew the head and get a barb and replace where the head was screwed in with a barb like this, and then put your flex pipe on, and then put your head on the flex pipe. That a lot of people do that frequently because it's just really hard if a head is hard piped into a system. It's hard, a lot of times they're sticking up that far out of the ground, or they're too far down, or if you run over them, that little nipple is brittle and it'll break off. There's a lot of things, a lot of ways that systems that are hard pipe get damaged, in the way that it's fairly easy to convert those and just take those heads out, screw a nipple in place of where the head was, install a piece of funny pipe, and then just put the head on the funny pipe. Okay? The other type of head that you'll find in your yard is what's called a pop-up. What a pop-up does is, instead of rotating back and forth, it will just pop up and create a constant spray in a particular area. These also come apart about the same way as the other ones do. However, instead of having a filter in the bottom, they have a filter right underneath the nozzle, which is right here, like that. So these are the filters. If you have these type of heads that aren't spraying, this is where the filter is located that you need to take apart and clean. Now these pop-up heads, you can put different nozzles on these heads. The different nozzles will determine how far the spray goes, and you can get nozzles that will spray anywhere from 4 feet to 18 feet based on the way the nozzle is designed. You'll notice this one has a kind of a beige color head on it. The different, a lot of times the different size nozzles will be color coded. This beige one is an 18-foot nozzle. It'll spray 18 feet. That's about as far as you can get these type of sprinkler heads to go, is about 18 feet. And since they spray in a smaller pattern and they're spraying constantly in one area rather than going back and forth, they put out more water in the area that they're covering in the same amount of time as do these rotors. So if you're running your system for, say, 30 minutes and you have both rotors and pop-ups on the same zone, the areas that are getting covered by these pop-ups are getting probably about twice the amount of water as the areas that are being covered by these rotors. The proper way to install a system is to separate the zones where the zones either only have pop-ups on them or only have rotors. Some irrigation systems follow that rule, some don't. So ideally they should be separated. If they are separated, you can run the areas that have the pop-ups roughly about half the amount of time as the zones that have the rotors and still get the same amount of water on. Now, a lot of times people ask me, is one head better than the other? They're used for different purposes. These are used to cover large areas. These are used to cover smaller, irregular sized areas. So if you have areas in your yard that are, like triangles or irregular shaped or small areas, then these are the type of heads that you would find in that area. One isn't any better than the other. As a matter of fact, these probably are a little higher maintenance because the filters on these are smaller than the filters on these, because it's easier to clog these nozzles than it is to clog these larger nozzles. The particular nozzle that I have on this one is an adjustable nozzle. It can be adjusted to spray anywhere from just a sliver to a full circle. And it can be done with this collar here, turning this collar back and forth. Other nozzles that can be put on these are fixed. They're just set to spray either a quarter, half, three-quarter, or a full circle. These nozzles can be changed out, and it really doesn't matter the brand of head that you use. They're all interchangeable, and they can be changed out real easy just by unscrewing the top and then screwing another one back on. Now, occasionally, these nozzles will come off, and the stem of the sprinkler head will be stuck down in there, and it'll be hard to access. One little trick that you can use to pull that stem out to replace the nozzle is, you'll notice on this Rainbird screwdriver there's little wings on the side of this screwdriver, and what that's for is to reach in here and hook a little lip that's on the side of that stem and pull it out so that you can access it without having to actually take the sprinkler head apart or take it out of the ground, and you can just pull it up like that. A lot of times if you're trying to change clean the filter, you've got the thing in the ground, and you can, when the nozzle is on there like that, it's not too hard to grab the nozzle and pull it up and hold it, and then remove the nozzle and take the filter out. But then when you go wash the filter, the stem is stuck back in there. You can just take this Rainbird screwdriver, which you can get at just about any Rainbird dealer should have it. Ace Hardware, Navarre Hardware, Ewing, they should all have these little screwdrivers. You just stick it in there and grab the lip of the inside of that stem and pull it out. These larger rotor heads also have interchangeable nozzles. Now they're a little bit harder to change, but it can come in very handy. Like for instance, if you have an area of your lawn, let's say that you have an area of your lawn that's in constant sunlight. There's no shade whatsoever, and it's requiring more water than another part of the lawn that's shaded. However, both areas are on the same zone. How can you get more water on that one area that is in full sunlight than in the other area that's shaded when the system is on the same zone? The way that you can do that is by changing out this little nozzle right here on the top of the sprinkler head. Most sprinkler heads have either a 2 or a 3 gallon per minute nozzle. Now these nozzles can be interchanged so that this one, I'm looking at it now, it has 3.0, which is a 3 gallon per minute nozzle. So what that means is as the system is running, this head is putting out 3 gallons of water per minute. If I wanted to increase that to say 5 gallons per minute, I could change out that nozzle. The way I would do that is I would insert the screwdriver in the top of the head, and then there's a little set screw that goes down on top of that nozzle that holds that nozzle in place. And I would unscrew that set screw until it was retracted and it's not over that nozzle anymore. Then I just take my screwdriver and just stick it in the nozzle and just pull it out, and the nozzle comes out. Now sometimes these set screws will get retracted and the sprinkler head will actually blow the nozzle out, and you'll see that sprinkler head has just a steady stream of water, just a huge stream of water coming out of it. If it looks like you have a head that's just gushing water instead of a nice even distribution of water, what we call a rain curtain, where it's just an even distribution of water from the head all the way out to the farthest point. If it's just a steady stream, it's probably lost its nozzle. So they have these nozzle trees. Again, you can get these at Rainbird Dealer. They have just different size nozzles on them. The biggest one on here right now is a 6.0, which would be twice as much water coming out as a 3.0. And I would just take the nozzle, stick it back in the head, and then reset the set screw, screw it down so that the screw is in front of the nozzle and it's not gonna pop out when I turn the system back on. That's a really easy way to get more water onto your lawn in one particular way. On the pop-ups, there is a set screw in the middle, and it's right in the center here, and you can screw that down and it'll decrease the spray. Yes, it'll decrease the volume and the distance the water is coming out. Most of the time, these aren't really reliable. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I found that, some, and I can't really tell you why sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, but they're not, the most reliable way to get less water out is just to get a smaller nozzle and replace the whole nozzle, but they do, yes, they do have a little screw that you can torque down, and it's supposed to decrease the amount of water coming out of here. Yes, sir?
A rotor style head set at 360-degree rotation. Occasionally it will only travel 180 and come back. But if you can kind of tamper with the full extension of the pop-up in it, or the rotation of it, it will then go 360 for a couple cycles and come back, maybe only do 180 again. Maybe
I would just replace the head. Yeah, it sounds like just, for whatever reason, it's just wearing out. And yeah, and usually heads are, when they start going bad, when they start doing weird stuff or not turning or whatever, it's best just to go buy, they're like the rotors are about $12, $14. These are about $1 and the nozzle's about $1. So it's better just to go ahead and get a new head rather than just try and fix the old one. Yes, ma'am.
The challenge I'm having is, the larger ones, or getting the dry area is between where it pops up and the water goes out.
Uh-huh.
But it's that area under there that it's not getting enough water. What do I do to get the water in that area?
Yeah, it may be, okay, the question is it doesn't, with that particular system, the area that's closest to the head is not getting as much water as the area that's farther out from the head. It could be that the nozzle has gotten worn out, because what the nozzle is designed to do is designed to create a rain curtain, which is supposed to distribute equal amounts of water from the head all the way out to 30 feet, which is about the distance the head is supposed to reach. And it's supposed to be even. If it's not even, then perhaps there's been some debris or sand or something that's gone through the system and worn that nozzle so that it's not providing that rain curtain. So the best, probably the best solution would either be to change out the nozzle, like I just showed you, or just get another head, either one. With the, you're talking about with the rotor head? Yes. Yes, there isn't another adjustment on this rotor head, and it's the same screw that you use that you loosen to remove the nozzle. You can screw that screw down farther, and what it'll do, it'll come down in front of the stream of water that's coming out of the head, and it'll impede that stream. So it'll actually shorten the throw of the water that's coming out of the head if you screw down that screw some more. So the maximum reach of this head, or a head like that under ideal pressure, would be about 30 feet. So from here to about the back of the wall. Now if you say maybe from where the head is, you've got the house or maybe a fence 20 feet away, and you don't want it to hit that particular thing, then you can just screw that screw down, and it'll impede that water flow and shorten the throw of it. Okay, the question is, proper installation. How high or low should these be? That's a matter of preference. I like to have them just maybe slightly above the ground so I can see them to maintain them. I definitely don't like them countersunk, because the grass seems to grow over the top of them and there's more maintenance that way. Don't like them too high because they get hit by a mower, but just enough so you can see them. I mean, and again, that's the beauty of the flex pipe, is that you can kind of adjust it up and down. Okay, let me talk just a couple more minutes about if you want to add a head. Let's say there's an easy way to add a head to a system if you want to, as long as it's not too far away from an existing head, and that's just using funny pipe. If you have a head like this, let's say, and you have an area around the corner. Let's say you've got a head right here, and you want it right here on the corner, and you want to add one around here. It's not too far. What you can do is you can just cut the funny pipe and add in a T like that, and put put another barb right there, and you can add a head right here. Now you can't go very far with funny pipe because it is so thin. You'll lose pressure. I've seen some systems that were done completely in funny pipe, and they work terribly. So don't, even just because funny pipe, there's no glue or anything that needs to be done to this. It's just compression. And if you have a short distance to go, or maybe you want to extend ahead, maybe bring it a little farther out into the yard, you can use just a coupler on the funny pipe and run a little bit more funny pipe a little farther out. Funny pipe is very easy to work with. Again, it requires very little well, it requires no glue, very little tools, and everything just kind of pushes together. So that's an easy way to do it. I wouldn't go probably any more than 10 or 12 feet using funny pipe, because, like I say, because the distance, or the diameter of the pipe doesn't allow for the distance and create the volume and the pressure the heads need to do that. Okay. One other way that you can add a head to a system is just with a T. What you would do is, if you wanted to cut in to your existing system, the way you find a pipe is locate a head, dig out the head, and then follow it back to wherever the pipe is. That's about the only way. There is no magic way to find pipe in the ground. And a lot of whenever a system is put in the ground, they don't make schematics, they don't map it out. It's just laid in and done. So if you're wanting to add anything to the system, you just physically have to go in and dig it back and find out where the pipe is. And then once you get the pipe located, cut into the pipe. By the way, these are some really handy, this is a really handy tool. It makes cutting PVC pipe very easy. Rather than using a saw or something like that, it's just a PVC pipe cutter, and just by squeezing it and turning it, it cuts through the pipe very easily. When you're in the, when you're working in the ground like that, it's just really easy. So what you would do, you would cut into the pipe, leave a little bit of a gap in the pipe, and then install a T. And another pipe along with your along with your head, however far you wanted to run it out. Okay. Are there any questions at this point? Yes, sir. The question is, there's various materials that you can use to glue PVC. When you're working with an irrigation system, it's not as critical as, like, say, when you're working with household plumbing. If you glue your main water line, if it leaks, it's going to cost you money, and it's going to be a big hassle. If your irrigation pipe leaks a little bit in the ground, it's really no big deal, because that's where the water is going anyway. So there are, a lot of when you glue pipe, they have like primer, purple primer you put on, and then you put on the glue and that kind of thing. Personally, when I use it, I don't use the primer, because your irrigation system is not holding static pressure 24 hours a day like, say, your water main is. It's only being pressurized, and it's not even being fully pressurized, because the water is coming out at the other end of the sprinkler heads when it's running. So it's holding less pressure for just a limited amount of time whenever the system's running. So it's not as critical to get such a good connection between the fittings. So I just use a standard PVC glue. Now they do make what's called a blue glue, and the blue glue basically is designed to be used where you have a wet situation, where you have a leak and you have to be able to glue the pipe while the leak is there. It's very fast acting, basically. It's just a very fast acting glue. It's harder to work with if you don't get the setting just right when you put it together. There's no forgiveness there. So I like to use, like, either there's a clear or an amber colored glue that gives you a little bit more grace to work with and make sure you get the fitting right. And you can, if it's not quite right, you have a little bit of time to play with it and get it just right. But I personally don't use any primer. Cutting this pipe off and trying to fit in another pipe. If you have a pipe that has just either a small hole or a slice in it, but the whole pipe isn't broken, one of the easiest ways to fix it is to create a Band-Aid to put over the pipe. And the way you do that is you need to start with a piece of thin wall. It can't be thick, it has to be thin wall PVC pipe, and cut about 2 inches or so of the PVC, just enough to cover the crack or hole or whatever it is in the pipe. And then once you have this, then cut it long ways like that, so that you've created a patch like this. And what you can do is if you have one of these pipes coming down that's damaged, and say there's a slit in it right here, then take some glue, put some glue over the slit, and then take some glue and put the glue on the inside of this patch piece, and then snap the patch piece on the outside of the pipe like that. That's one of the easiest ways to fix a small hole or a small leak in a PVC pipe. And when you do that, you want to kind of move that patch piece around just to make sure the glue seats really well, and then just let it dry, and it works really well. It keeps you from having to cut and put in other fittings, and it's very, very quick, easy fix. However, there are times when you may have a broken pipe and you can't do that. The pipe is cracked all the way through, or for whatever reason the pipe is damaged, and you have to actually remove a whole section of the pipe in order to fix it. So the old style way to fix a pipe is if you have a pipe laying in the ground like this, you would put a coupler on each end of each section, and then you would need to dig back several feet so that you could actually bend the pipe up and insert another pipe in there. The PVC is very flexible. As a matter of fact, if you have a 20-foot section of 1-inch PVC, you can actually bend it 180 degrees to fit it in the back of a pickup truck. I've done that before. So it's very flexible, especially if it's hot out. So you would dig this back several feet, and then you would actually bend it up, and then when it came down, you would fit it into the coupler like that, and make sure that it's seated really well. Another easier way to do this is to use a quick fix fitting. Now you can get these at Ace Hardware, Navarre Lumber, and they're kind of cheater fittings because they slide back and forth. So if you have a broken pipe, you can put it on one end of the pipe, and then you can take your coupler and glue it on the other end of the pipe, and then you just slide the pipe into the other pipe like that and glue it, and you're all done. This is all watertight, it won't leak, and it's a really quick, easy way to fix a broken pipe. Okay, let's talk about pumps and wells for just a moment. You have to periodically reprime your pump. That's a common problem when you have a well and a pump, having to prime the pump. The way a pump and a well is set up is when they dig a well, they use a piece of 2-inch pipe that they put down into the ground. How far they go down into the ground really varies depending on the geology of your particular area. They could, and people who, the professionals that dig wells kind of know this, and they know what to look for as far as how far down they need to go. Just because the well is deeper doesn't mean it's going to be any better. What they look for a certain type of real grainy sand as they're digging that's coming up out of the well, and when they hit that kind of grainy sand, then they know that they've gotten into an area of the aquifer that has a good amount of water that they can use for irrigation. It could be 18 feet, it could be 30 feet, it could be 100 feet. It just really depends. I've had areas in Navarre here where one house will have an 18-foot well that gives them plenty of water. Another house right next door, they have to go down 50 or 60 feet to get water. I mean, it really, the other day I was talking to someone, and they lived up off of 87 off of Gordon Evans Road, kind of north 80, well, right before you get to the Air Force property there off 87. It was unfortunate because they were in phase of new construction. They were just building their house. They were going to get their CO, certificate of occupancy, within a couple days. Everything was ready to go, and they were ready to install their landscape. Well, the well driller came out there, and he went down 100 feet and could not find water. So they are, and I actually talked to the well driller, and he said, yeah, it was, and I know the guy, I know he's very good at what he does. And he said there just wasn't anything there. And 2 doors down, they had an irrigation system, a pump, and a well. So it really depends on the micro location of where they're doing that well and that system. So these people, unfortunately, they're left with very few options. They can either irrigate with city water, which is going to be very expensive, or they can try to xeriscape their yard with very low watering plants, very little grass, that kind of thing, which is probably not going to fit the neighborhood very well, or kind of do a combination of each, kind of limit the amount of grass, and then choose the grass, choose either Zoysia or Bermuda, which are the most drought-tolerant grasses that they can use in this area, and use them and water them just very sparingly. But to keep a lawn alive using city water, you're talking about several $1,000s a year to do that versus using a well and a pump. What solutions are there to having rust in your water? That's a common problem in this area with irrigation wells. There's a lot of minerals in some of the water that will create rust stains on the house and on the driveways and fences and things like that. There's actually 3 or 4 different solutions for that problem. The first solution, although it's not a guaranteed solution, is to drill a deeper well. Many times, if you do drill a deeper well, you will get into some water that doesn't have the mineral in it. However, like I say, it's not a guarantee, and it's a roll of the dice, and you can spend $1,000 on a new well and still have rusty water. The only way to get by that is to do a deep 100-foot well, which would be equal to like a drinking water well, and have a submersible pump, which is a pump that actually is tubular shaped and sits down at the bottom of the well and pumps the water from the bottom up, instead of a pump like this. Those wells, you're talking between $3,000 and $4,000 for a well like that. I mean, that's as close to a guarantee as you'll get as far as getting water without minerals in it. Another solution to that problem is they make systems that attach to the irrigation system that siphon chemicals out of a tank, and it neutralizes the rust. Those, again, aren't 100% effective. They may help, and then you also have the maintenance of the system, and you have to keep adding the chemical to the tank every few days to a week, or just depending on how much you use the system. So they're not really foolproof, and they're not a complete fix. Another option to solving that problem is being very careful about how you adjust your heads so that they don't spray onto the driveways and houses and things like that. A lot of people, sometimes what they do is they'll irrigate the area right around their house with city water, and then the rest of their lawn, where it's not an issue whether it has minerals or not, spraying in the grass, they'll irrigate that with well water. So those are a few options. If you have, and then the fourth option is just clean the rust off every year. So there's not any easy, quick fix to it, and easy, quick, cheap fix. There's not really one, but those are the options that you can have for rust. Yes, sir.
When you say clean it off, what do you clean it off with?
There's rust remover, Ace Hardware. There's 2 or 3 chemicals that you can get using the rust remover and or pressure washing. Some of the rust remover chemicals you can, like especially on plastic fencing or things like that, or even driveways, you can just spray it on and it neutralizes it. It changes the oxidation of the iron in there, and it turns the rust. It eliminates the rust color on those things. Okay. Now the question was about a pump losing prime periodically. The way this is set up is this is where the pump draws the water from out of the well, and the well will go down like I said, anywhere from 18 to 40, 50 feet. This component right here is a check valve, and it's a one-way valve, so that when the pump draws the water up out of the well, this check valve is a one-way valve that holds the water in place so that the pump does not have to draw the water up from the bottom of the well every time it turns on. So when the pump in the well is first turned on and there is no water in here, the way that the pump draws the water out the very first time is the pump is turned on, you take a garden hose and open this valve on top and run water from the garden hose into the pump cavity. And as the water fills the pump cavity while the pump is running, it creates suction that pulls the water up from the well into the pump. Once it comes up past this check valve and into the pump is what we call primed, and the system is running. When the pump is shut off, this check valve keeps the water from falling back into the well and holds the water right here. It's kind of like taking a straw, taking a drink and sucking the water up into a straw and putting your finger on top, and the water stays in the straw. It's the same concept. Now, what happens is if periodically that water falls back down into the well, the pump needs to be reprimed. A couple things could be happening. Most likely, the check valve is wearing out, or there's something in the check valve that's not working right, and there's a slow leak that's causing that water to leak back down into the well. Another possibility could be that, say, if you've got this pipe going down into the well, it could be that the joints, either where it's sealed here or possibly right here, could be bad, and there's air that's getting up into this joint and allowing the water to leak back down. That could be happening also. So if the pump is having to be primed, that is most likely something around the check valve. Another possibility would be that there is a leak somewhere in the joints between the pump and the check valve. All of the plumbing between the pump and the bottom of the well has to be completely secure. There can't be any cracks, gaps, leaks, anything. If there's anything between the bottom of the well and this pump that allows air to get into this pipe, the pump is not going to work the way it should. It's either going to work inefficiently or it's not going to work at all. So there's a fitting that screws into the front of the pump right here, and if this fitting is not sealed properly, then it could have an air leak in it. Some systems I've seen have been they've been repaired, and in the repair there's been 3 or 4 different joints that have been created in trying to repair or replace the pump or whatever. The more joints that are created between the pump and the bottom of the well, the more opportunity there is for something to leak and something not to work right, which would create an air leak and cause the pump not to work.
Is
Yes.
the check valve normally below ground or above?
That's a good question. The question is the check valve normally above ground or below ground? Normally it's above ground, and it really doesn't matter it doesn't matter that much the position of the check valve. Sometimes it's on the front of the pump like this. Sometimes it's on the bottom like this. Sometimes they do put them down into the ground. The reason they do that is if the water table of the well is like farther down in the ground than normal, they'll bury the check valve deeper into the ground because it'll be easier for the check valve to hold the prime farther down in the ground if the water table is really low. So if you look at your pump and you don't see a check valve there, then most likely it's buried. I've seen some of them buried as deep as 3 or 4 feet down into the ground, which is a real inconvenience if you have to change it. You have to dig a hole big enough to get your body and your hands down in and cut the pipe and replace it and plumb it all up. It's a big hassle, but some of them are done like that. When you take these pumps apart, the impeller on this pump is actually very small. It's a disc no bigger than that big around and about that thick, but it spins at such a high rate of speed that it actually generates the flow of water that is great enough to produce 30 gallons a minute of water flow at a pretty good pressure. As the gentleman mentioned, this is horizontal in nature. Some pumps actually will sit on top of the well and will be vertical. That's a different type of pump. It's called a jet pump. The application for jet pumps is when the water, the well is so deep that a horizontal pump would not be able to pull the water from as far down in the ground as it is. The water table has to be no more a maximum of about 20 feet from the top of the ground down for this pump to be able to work. In some areas, again, the harder areas, if you go north of 399, Highway 399, East Bay Boulevard, if you go north of that, water becomes a lot more scarce, or groundwater, well water becomes a lot more scarce. Anything south of 399, it's fairly easy to dig a well and you can use these horizontal pumps. North of there, it gets a little kind of sketchy. So sometimes they have to go deeper, and if they find water at 50, 60 feet rather than 18 to 20 feet, whatever, they can still they can still make a well and they can still make an irrigation system, but they have to use a jet pump, which the design of the pump is different than this. And basically what it does is it kind of takes the water and forces it back down into the well and then back up again. It's just a different engineering way to get the water out of the ground from a deeper level, basically is what it does. So the jet pumps don't create as much volume as this pump does. So if you have one of those pumps, you probably have more zones in your system with fewer heads on them. And the jet pumps don't require necessarily require priming. Sometimes they do, but not always. They just work on a whole different philosophy of moving water, basically. So just a couple things about this type of pump. It's about 3 or 4 years ago, can't remember, I want to say maybe 3 years ago now, we had a very, very cold winter, if you remember. We had temperatures down in the 20s for many, many days during the winter. Unfortunately, a lot of people were not familiar with that. They had not been around with weather that, got that cold, and they didn't know that they were supposed to drain their pumps, and they didn't drain them. When the weather gets that cold and this cavity here is full of water, the water in here will freeze. When the water freezes, it expands and it'll crack this pump cavity here, and it'll ruin the pump. So what I recommend is that in October, when you shut your system down, there's a little drain plug right here at the bottom of the pump. And if you unscrew this drain plug and then open this spigot to allow the air to replace the water that comes out of here, drain the pump, because in case we do have one of those years where we get temperatures down into the 20s, that will save you from replacing this pump and from this cracking and having to replace it. Then in the springtime, well, let me give you a little tip. When you unscrew this plug, let the water drain out, screw the plug back in for a couple reasons. Number one, you might lose the plug. Number two is if you don't screw it back in right away, rust will get in there, and it'll be really difficult to screw that plug back in if that's all rusty. I've had, some times I've had to really work with it. I've been able to get it back in, but it's best to just go ahead and replace it right away. And then in the springtime, when it's time to start your system up again, what you do with the plug back in place, turn the system on, let the pump run, take a garden hose. They make special female to female fittings that will go on, like couplers. You don't really need that. Sometimes what I do, just to make it quick, I'll even unscrew the top here and get like a bucket of water and just pour water in the top of here. It doesn't take very much water, maybe less than a gallon, to fill this cavity and get the pump going and pull that water out of that well and get it primed again. That's how you go about priming the pump. Yes?
Go again.
That's all right.
With the vertical pump, the jet pump, is there a drain? What?
No, you don't. In vertical, the jet pumps you really don't need to worry about, because the water, there is no water cavity in there that you have to worry about.
In case you're not worried about the water before the check valve, above the check valve in the pipe.
Correct. Yeah. And on the jet pump, you're not going to have a check valve either. I mean, it's a whole different animal. Whole different animal. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Tom.
Is there any other way to detect the leaks coming to the pump other than visual, or just spray water on them?
Good question. The question is are you talking about like an air leak?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you have a system that say you turn the pump on, let's say in the spring, it's time to you prime the pump and you're pouring water in here and nothing's happening. If everything's working right, this should prime fairly quickly, like within 30 seconds to a minute. You should have water coming out of here. If you don't, it's possible that you have an air leak, a cracked pipe, a cracked joint somewhere between the pump and the well. A lot of times you won't see it. It could be just a hairline crack. All it has to be is something, just a gap big enough for a little bit of air to go through, and the pump won't prime. One of the ways that you can kind of test that to see that if there is an air leak now, it's not a a fail-proof test, but it's kind of an experiment. As you're priming the pump and it's running, if you run water over the joints, sometimes if there's an air leak in those joints, that water that you're running over the joints will temporarily fill that air gap and it'll start to prime. So if you're taking the hose and you've got your hose and your water running in here, the pump is running, it's not priming. If you take the hose and just wet this area while you're priming and you hear the pump kind of pick up and start to prime, then you go, there's an air leak here and somewhere in here. If that happens, don't try to just replace the joint that you suspect. Just go ahead and replace the whole thing. Cut off the check valve, cut off everything, and replace the whole plumbing, because I assure you, you'll just go from replacing joint to joint to joint to joint, because there may be more than one problem. If there's one problem one place, there will be a problem somewhere else. And I've seen people do that, and and the other thing is it's very important to get the screw in joints well sealed. There is either Teflon tape or there's like a plumber's putty that you can put on these threads and just slop it on there and get this sealed up really well. You may, if you're having a problem like that, you may want to just call an irrigation specialist, because they do this stuff all the time. It can get real frustrating working with this stuff, because again, the slightest little air leak is going to prevent your pump from pulling the water out of the well. The question is it important in the Midwest, where you have really cold weather? If you have irrigation systems, what they do up there is they actually have a little air chuck on the side of the system that you can blow the air out of the pipes before winter, because the pipes could crack and freeze. That's not necessary here. As long as the pipes are 6 inches in the ground, it's not going to get cold enough in the ground to crack the pipes or damage any of the components. The only thing that's really vulnerable is the pump and any of the pump plumbing above the ground, because when you drain the pump, you might drain everything out of this pipe here, but you won't drain everything out of the check valve and out of here. So this is still vulnerable to freezing. If you want to, you can wrap this part with like a blanket or something, or you can even throw a blanket over the whole thing. Some people, instead of draining their pumps, they just wrap it up really good with some insulation material. You can do that. Or they put like a doghouse over it with a light bulb, or there's several different things, just as long as you keep this from freezing. Now, if it gets down to like 32 degrees and just kind of bumps, the 30-degree mark, and then for an hour or so during the night and then goes back up, this isn't going to freeze with a couple hours of 30-degree weather. But when it gets down in well into the 20s and stays there, like if we have weather, like during the day it doesn't get above 40, and then it starts heading toward the 30s by 7, 8 o'clock at night, and it's going to get down in the 20s overnight, then you need to start being concerned, and you need to do something about keeping this from freezing. But if it's just going to bump 30 degrees and then go back up, it'll be fine. You shut the system down in October, late October, end of October, then just go ahead and drain the pump. And we probably won't get any really cold weather until December or January, but might as well just go ahead and drain it and be done with it and not worry about it. Yes, sir.
Are all the systems on wells around here, or is there on the reclaimed water is a different system?
Yeah, some of the newer neighborhoods, with the smaller lots on them, have reclaimed water there. But even a lot, they're not terribly reliable. So a lot of people, even though they have reclaimed water available, will still put in a well and a pump, because that's going to give you the very best volume and pressure for your system rather than the reclaimed.
So if you have the reclaimed, will you not have a pump like that then? Is that?
Correct. If you're running off reclaimed water, you will not have a pump. You'll just have a water tap, just like your regular household water tap. You'll have a reclaimed water tap that you'll hook your system to, and it'll run off that water tap. But the volume and the pressure will be significantly lower than what you would get off a pump in a well, so you would have more zones and fewer heads on each zone. The question is, what is a French drain and what does it do? The purpose of a French drain is to facilitate drainage out of an area that has poor drainage. Now, the idea behind the French drain is that in soils that are slow to drain, that don't drain very well, you would dig out an area and fill that area with rock or very porous material that the water can flow into and drain well. The problem that we have in doing a French drain in this area is that our sand already drains well. Usually if an area is prone to flooding, it's because of the water table. You know, removing soil and replacing the sand, removing sand and replacing with rock isn't going to do anything with the water table. So areas that flood around here, it's not because the water has a hard time draining, it's because the water table is so high that the water just has nowhere to go. So in most cases around here, a French drain really doesn't provide any benefit. Okay. The question is, what grasses do I recommend for this area? My number one choice for grass in this area is Zoysia. Zoysia is not a bulletproof grass. It's not a perfect grass, but it has fewer problems than any of the other grasses that we grow around here. It's very dense, so it creates a nice trophy lawn, and it just very resilient when it, if and when it does get a problem. So. Zoysia has not been available to this area up until like 5 years ago when Sod Farms started growing it. The only thing that Sod Farms grew up until about 5 years ago or so was Centipede and a little bit of St. Augustine. So that's what we were stuck with. You know, the availability of sod is basically how is the trucking distance between where you're at and the sod farm. So if you're beyond a reasonable trucking distance, then you don't have these grasses available. But now the sod farms have started to grow those grasses, and they've started to grow Zoysia, and a lot of people are using it, and it's done very well. So I really like it. Zoysia is a good grass. Zoysia. Zoysia. Yes. Seed around here is a very unreliable way to establish a lawn. It's what I tell people. If you could reliably establish a lawn from seed around here, all the builders would do it. They wouldn't go to the expense of installing sod. But you can't. It's very hard to get the seed to germinate. It's very hard to get it to take. If it does take, it takes a long time to grow up and everything. So I do not recommend using seed unless you have a lot of patience and just want to experiment. But if you want to, get an established lawn, sod or plugs is a good way to do that.
How does the Zoysia plugs work, Skip? Do they spread out or something?
Zoysia plugs do work, but it takes a long time. So Zoysia, one of the characteristics of Zoysia, it grows slowly, which is good and bad. It's good if you're having to mow it, but it's bad if you're wanting to establish it. I had one client one time who took a pallet of Zoysia grass and checkerboarded his centipede lawn with it, and it was still checkerboarded 2 years later. I mean, you could still see the pieces of Zoysia laying there. So if you want to convert your lawn to Zoysia, the best thing to do is just scrape it all up and put in all new. It doesn't spread very well. Okay, yes.
What would be your number 2 pick in grass?
My number 2 pick for grass would be probably Bermuda. However, Bermuda, the only thing about Bermuda is it is not shade tolerant at all. If you have any shade in your yard, it's not going to do very well. It does great in direct sunlight, and it's very hardy, very forgiving, low maintenance. I like Bermuda almost as much as I like Zoysia. And then after that, I'm kind of, it's a toss-up between Centipede and St. Augustine. Both of those grasses have their problems. St. Augustine is very susceptible to disease activity and pests called chinch bugs. And Centipede is very susceptible to disease and mole crickets. So, you know, either one of those you have to stay on top of them a lot. But if you want to add heads to your existing system, how do you know if you have enough pressure to do that? Here's kind of a shortcut. What you can do is if you turn on a zone to your system, let it run, and if you have a spigot on your pump like that, open the spigot up all the way and look at the zone. If you see no pressure decrease with the spigot running full blast, then you probably have enough pressure to add at least another 2 or 3 heads, because this is going to, your heads are going to put out 2-3 gallons a minute. This is probably putting out 10 gallons a minute with it wide open. So if it's wide open and you don't have any loss of pressure, then you probably are okay. Another way that you can tell is when the system's running and especially on a rotor like this, when it's running and the head's popped up, press on the head. If you feel a pretty good amount of resistance, then it's got good pressure and you can probably add a head or 2. If you can just take one finger and push it down with just one finger, then probably not. If there's not enough, if you can just push it down with one finger, there's not very much pressure there, and you probably wouldn't do well to add to that zone. Thank you for joining me for this presentation. If you're having problems with your lawn, call me for a free consultation, 850-939-9868. I just have this passion for taking unhealthy lawns, finding out what it's going to take to make them healthy again.
Father & Son has been taking care of my lawn since I installed it. I have people stop all the time and tell me I have the best lawn in Kelly Plantation. It's just incredible. So I would recommend Father & Son. As a matter of fact, people have stolen my signs off the grass after you come and spray. So I think they want them for the number. I'm very happy with what Father & Son does.
Call me today for a free consultation to find out how I can help you with your troubled lawn.